In today's video, we're taking a look at 7 NHL teams that you need to watch here in the coming weeks. It can be very busy. We're going to take a look at some trade rumors involving all 7 teams, and we also have some signings to discuss and another update on the Coyotes prospect Mitchell Miller, who was recently renounced and no longer affiliated with the Coyotes. We'll discuss all the latest news coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we have 7 teams we want to take a look at today who have some cap space that could weaponize it and really kind of open up the NHL trading landscape here again in the near future. But before we jump into that, I just want to take a look at a couple quick NHL signings and an update here on the Coyotes situation with Mitchell Miller. The only official signing we have tonight is Warren Foegle signing a 1-year deal to Carolina Hurricanes valued at just over $2.15 million, which is a pretty solid deal in my opinion. Restricted free agent, comes to terms with the Canes, gets that out of the way. Pretty fair deal overall. Foegle slowly kind of working his way up here, becoming a more important player for them over the past few seasons, and certainly avoids arbitration and gets a pretty fair contract. This is pretty much exactly right in the middle where a lot of people thought this contract would end up, and it's a great deal for both sides. Now, the other signing that's not official yet but should be announced tomorrow is unrestricted free agent forward Dominik Kahun appears to be headed to the Edmonton Oilers. Now, this is going to be his 3rd NHL team in his young NHL career, which is kind of confusing because he seems to play relatively well, put up some decent points everywhere, but it still bounced around a fair bit. Of course, he came over, signed with the Chicago Blackhawks, signed a 2-year contract, put up, I believe it was 37 points in his rookie season, and then obviously from there he get traded to the Penguins. Was on pace to kind of break that point total, but then get traded to Buffalo. Didn't play there too much, but still put up a few points, was okay, and then didn't get qualified as an RFA after completing his 2-year entry-level contract, so he became a UFA, and now he appears to be headed to the Edmonton Oilers. He's been over in Germany, and a German news outlet has broken this news, but it's waiting for NHL sources and the Oilers organization to make this official, which is expected to happen probably sometime tomorrow. So I don't know the exact terms of the contract. It's believed to be a 1-year deal. Of course, he'll be reunited with fellow German and former teammate that he's played with on the national team before, Leon Draisaitl. So obviously some familiarity there for him, which is great. So Kahun very well could be really a nice pickup here for the Edmonton Oilers. I had mentioned before that the Oilers were expected to add some more depth in the wings, that they were kind of looking at Mike Hoffman as a possibility, but it might be just a little bit too much money unless they move out a defenseman or something, and that was something that we thought we might see earlier but never happened. So for a player like this, who's, I don't know the terms of the deal, but I'm assuming it's probably going to be around $1 million, or he could be that extra depth forward to give them an extra, maybe 40 to 45 points next year. That could be a big boost to get Jesse Puljujarvi coming back. The Edmonton Oilers might actually be deeper than they were last year, which could certainly kind of help solidify that secondary scoring, which was something that they really need to have to kind of take this team a step forward. But to me, their big question mark still in goal, bringing back the same goaltending tandem that let them down last year. So we'll see what happens, but this could be a great signing for the Oilers. Now, a quick update as well on Mitchell Miller, the first selection in the 4th round of the Arizona Coyotes at the 2020 draft, which we talked about in the prior video, that the Coyotes came back and renounced that draft pick. He's no longer affiliated, and then his tenure at the University of North Dakota also came to an end, where they have no longer have him as part of their men's hockey team. Of course, we already went through the history here, but he was priorly convicted of a crime back when he was in 8th grade. It was a hate type of crime towards another student, and clearly, a lot of these teams like the Coyotes and UND were getting a lot of backlash for supporting him at this point where he hasn't really shown much remorse or apologeticness towards his victim. So there's rumors now that he may get some opportunities to go over and play in the KHL, which seems to be the case for a lot of players, and even coaches go when they're kind of worn up their welcome into North American level. We've seen it happen with Coach Bill Peters, who obviously was fired out of the NHL with the Flames after a racial remark situation with Akeem Alou. We've seen Brendan Leipzig go over to the KHL after he lost his NHL opportunity due to some group chats that were information that was released as well. There's certainly seems like the opportunities over there don't really factor these types of things in. So obviously he won't have really any opportunity right now to play hockey at any kind of a high level in North America. He might leave school, obviously go over there, play. He'll earn decent money. Maybe at some point he'll get his act together and show enough to get an opportunity. I don't know. It's really difficult to say what the future holds for this guy. But if he wants to play professional hockey, he's going to have to do so, whether it be at the KHL or if a European league will take him on or something to that effect. But he's still young, still has time to recover from this as a person. Hopefully he can learn from it and take some steps forward to apologizing, showing some remorse, and we'll see what the future holds for him. But KHL might be where he's at here in the short term. Now, as I mentioned, I want to take a look at 7 teams. This is an article from Sportsnet I came across that was published just a couple days ago, and it looks interesting for some of these teams who we know there's still a bit of a, like I said before, like a clog in the trade market. We had a lot of activity, and now we're kind of at a standstill. There's still some trickling in signings, but not a lot going on. And when it comes to the trade market, these are the main teams who really have the wiggle room here to make something happen. They could help other teams kind of get out of cap jail, so to speak, and really take on some contracts that might not be the most favorable, but also set themselves up for future assets as well. So let's take a look at these teams. First up, we got the Detroit Red Wings, who have over $15 million in space right now. They do have to sign Anthony Mantha, so obviously part of that's going to get eaten up there. We've already seen them bring in a guy like Mark Stahl from the Rangers. They signed Bobby Ryan. So we'll see what else Detroit could do. But they're a team right now who actually, they're not expected to be a whole lot better this year. They're not expected to be all that great. So for Detroit to consider taking on a bad contract off some of these teams that are in cap jail, whether it be like a Louis Eriksson type of contract out of Vancouver, there's certainly other ones that fit that description here as well. Something to that effect. Now, of course, in that case, Louis Eriksson has control. Keep that in mind. He'd have to agree to waive his no trade clause, but still, Detroit's in that kind of situation where they're garnering a lot of prospects and picks, and they have the space necessary to kind of take that on with the right sweeteners involved. So Detroit, Yzerman is a situation where he's even talked about this before, like they did with Mark Stahl, that if the right deals come along, that he's certainly open to gaining future assets in order to use some short-term cap space. So don't be surprised if we see maybe make another move in that capacity. Doesn't mean for sure they're going to, but they certainly have that capacity. And I know as we get closer to the season starting, there's many teams right now that are over the cap and need to find a way to make a move. Vegas is a team that jumps out in that category as well. So stay tuned for Detroit to maybe be one of the teams that possibly help them out. Now we've also got the Ottawa Senators with over $13 million in cap space. Of course, they've been fairly active this offseason. They brought in goalie Matt Murray from Pittsburgh. We've seen them go after guys like Galchenyuk and Dadonov in free agency. And it's going to be interesting to see what this team has to do next year. Now, even though they have $13 million in cap space, their actual dollars out are actually a fair bit even lower than the cap hit. So they're in a situation where they're not spending too much. So they very well could still take on a contract here from another team for the right sweeteners being involved again, like the Red Wings. I don't think the Senators are a team that's in a situation where they kind of need something, for their own personal gain. It's more about the future than it is the present with this team. I mean, they're expected to have Tim Stützle come over to training camp. They are, obviously going to be trying to sign Brady Tkachuk long term. They have Thomas Chabot. They have a lot of other prospects. So they don't really want to box out anybody else. They brought in enough veterans. They have that part looked after. But if it's a contract that would either go on LTIR or something they could bury in the minors, then it's certainly a possibility to see the Senators jump in and be active in that regard here as well. Now you get the Nashville Predators as well, and they seem to be a team that's poised for a big move here. It was only a year ago that we saw them make a big, bold move by signing Matt Duchene, and yet things did not work out. Duchene himself didn't have the greatest season. The team didn't have the greatest season. They've really tried to shake things up. They found a way to move on from Kyle Turris. They found a way to move on from Nick Bonino. They did not sign Craig Smith or Granlund in free agency, so they have some space to work with, which is good in a way, but that they were involved with Taylor Hall, and they did not get the job done in that regard. There's been a lot of talk they're interested in Mike Hoffman, but they're going to have to up their ante to do that, and if they were going to do it, then it would have happened by now. So I'm not saying for sure that it won't happen, but they could weaponize their space in that sense by getting a big free agent like Mike Hoffman, or they could go out via trade and make something else like a bold move. Like, for example, you could see them target one of the teams that are in cap jail that have some key RFAs. I'm looking at a team like the Tampa Bay Lightning, for example, with a guy like Cirelli or Sergachev. They'd probably target a guy like Cirelli more so because they have a pretty solid blue line themselves. I mean, you have to look around at some other teams as well. They're not the only ones with key RFAs. You're looking at the Islanders, like Matt Barzal, for example. The Islanders are better positioned than the Lightning, for example, but there's teams out there like that the Predators could certainly try to pull off a bold move on. Or they go to a team like Vegas, who are obviously conference rivals, but still, the Golden Knights are going to have to free up some money. Whether it be a guy like a Max Pacioretty or Jonathan Marchessault, so they very well could land one of those top forwards out of that organization for a pretty cheap price tag, given the fact that they need to free up some space. They could take advantage of that where they have the space to take that on. So I would look for Nashville to be active here in the trade market and to at least make one bold trade. That, I mean, they were freeing up the space for a reason, and they've yet to really put that reason to use, because I think they've tried and failed in other scenarios, and it's just a matter of time before they find something that lands here to try to get that scoring back, because they need somebody who can score there in Nashville desperately, and I'm sure David Poile will find a way to figure it out. Now, you've also got the New Jersey Devils with over $17 million in cap space. Could we see them use that to even trade out a guy like PK Subban? Now, you might say, well, how could they use their cap space to trade PK Subban? And they'd have that option to retain salary, or a lot of teams can't retain a whole lot because it just does not work mathematically. But they could be in a situation where they can retain up to 50%, which is the maximum you can do. I mean, there's a lot of teams that would not want PK Subban the way he played last year at $9 million. But for a 31-year-old right-shot defenseman with a great pass with a Norris Trophy on his resume, would you not consider taking that at $4.5 million for maybe some future assets as a small return package, maybe a second-round pick, third-round pick, maybe a prospect? New Jersey gets themselves a couple extra assets for the future. They free up a roster spot as well for another young player, and PK Subban goes on to another team. Now, I'm not saying for sure that would happen, but it is a way that this article explains that New Jersey could certainly take advantage of that cap space. I mean, it's difficult to say what's going to happen long-term with Subban. He's got 2 years left on his deal at $9 million. If he's not traded sometime this year, I could see with 1 year left that being a much more likely possibility, unless, of course, the Devils improve enough to be in a playoff hunt, which is difficult to say at this point. I'd say that they're probably a little further away than that from really having a good shot, but you just never know. This NHL has been kind of crazy the last couple of years with teams kind of moving up and down the standings here, and just depends on how many big steps we see their young players make. But again, the Devils have a ton of space. They have an eager GM. We've heard them talk about the offer sheet as well, which I mentioned in other videos. So if it's not retaining on a PK trade, could they not use that to go after like a Mikhail Sergachev, for example, what we talked about, or even a Ryan Pulock with the Islanders? Like, that defense would be their first target if they were going to do that. So, for example, maybe they save some money by trading away PK Subban at 50% retention, and then at the same time, they use that again to go after one of these RFAs. I mean, they could certainly use some extra assets to make sure that what they have to give up to do an offer sheet. So it's something that New Jersey is probably one of the most prime teams to make a bold move in one direction or another. So I'd certainly keep your eye on them here in recent weeks as well. Now, of course, another team on this list is the Columbus Blue Jackets, who also, like Nashville, went space clearing, I guess you could say, heading into the NHL draft and free agency, and yet they haven't really done too much in the way of anything too bold. Now, they still have to sign Pierre-Luc Dubois, which is going to be a significant signing for them, but they will still have room after that Dubois contract to do something fairly significant. I mean, we've seen them move out Ryan Murray. They traded Josh Anderson for Max Domi, and they have a short window here in the next couple of years before their cap situation is going to change drastically to continue making playoff runs and try to make a run here at a potential Stanley Cup. I mean, we've seen how they did this past year after all the free agent exodus, when a lot of us kind of wrote them off, and they certainly surprised us all. But in a couple of years' time, Werenski and Jones are both going to be UFAs, both commanding big bucks. They might have a hard time keeping both of them in their lineup. So this is kind of a situation with a flat cap that their window to kind of really make some big strides over the next 2 years. So I can see Jarmo Kekalainen, who's been one of the busier GMs here in recent years, a guy who's not afraid to be bold and do something drastic, go out there and do that type of thing. Now, Columbus, whether they go the offer sheet route towards one of their other teams, like I mentioned, like the Lightning or the Islanders, maybe they go to a team like the Golden Knights, for example, who need to move probably a scoring forward or something to make things work cap-wise. I can see him using that cap space to his advantage and making this team stronger and higher powered offensively before the start of the season. Now, you also have the Florida Panthers with $11.5 million. And out of the 7 teams, I'm not sure that they're really poised to make a big move like the others might be. But if they do make a big move, it might be to shed more money than it is to pick up money and help other teams out of cap jail. For example, the way this team has kind of had their offseason here so far, there was a lot of rumors that they were going to want to cut salary. And so far, that looks like they've kind of accomplished that. Doesn't look like they're bringing back Hoffman or Dodonov. So those are 2 contracts gone off the books that are fairly substantial. And of course, they did make some other moves. They brought in Alex Wenberg on a cheaper contract as well. But could they maybe look to retain a little bit of salary and maybe try to bring in some future assets on a guy like Aaron Ekblad? I mean, if they were to move anybody out significantly, Ekblad I think would be their primary choice, who has a fair bit of term left, over $7 million per season. Not saying that they're certainly going to move Ekblad, but I could see them shedding salary as much or more as any of these other teams on this list, where a lot of other teams have already gone through that phase and now seem to be poised to use that space to pick up. Whereas I'm not sure that Florida is really well positioned to maybe continue spending with a lower number available here to the cap. I mean, Florida is one of the more teams that I do worry about a little bit more financially compared to most teams, and I think it's probably more likely that those rumors were true, that they don't want to spend near the cap this year. So I think out of the 7 teams, I'd be most surprised if we've seen the Panthers make a big acquisition here out of all of them. Now, lastly here, we have the Los Angeles Kings on this list, and they have a fair bit of space, even though they have about $10 million in dead space with all the previous buyouts that are still on their books. They have over $13.5 million in space available, and they're a team who's loaded with prospects as well, so they don't really need to go out and make a bold move to really enhance their future. They just drafted Quinton Byfield. Very, very deep, if not the deepest prospect pool around the NHL as well. So, obviously they're a team. Again, if they were to do anything, I think it'd be a situation where they could maybe move out another veteran and retain salary if need be. I mean, this team has moved out a fair bit over the last year or two. They could continue to do that, but with what's left there, I'm not sure that there's a ton of interest out there. You've got your guys like, Doughty and Kopitar likely aren't going anywhere. Then you still have a little bit of time left on Jeff Carter and Dustin Brown, and I just don't know that there's a market out there even with retained salary for those guys. So I can see a situation where, even though they're listed in this Sportsnet article, that they might be one of the quieter teams out of all. Maybe they try to go out and maybe grab an extra player out of free agency that's left over here that's not signed. I just don't see the Kings being super active here. They don't need to be, really. They have a good mix right now of vets and youth. They have tons of great youth, so why not let them play and just carry on with what they're doing, because things are going great in their rebuild. So that is all for today. I'd love to know your thoughts on these 7 teams, what kind of bold moves we could see. Will they weaponize their cap space to take advantage of these other teams that are in cap jail, help them out, and at the same time help themselves up for the future? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content, and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.